people that Eric's worked with in the past, and currently I knew this was going to be a pretty exciting and cool talk, and I couldn't think of a kind of better way to wrap things up. Brian mentioned this talk several times this morning because you can do everything in the world to secure your systems, but if people can come and touch them and make love to them, then they can do all kinds of bad things to them. So let's give a big, warm round welcome to Eric Smith from LARES.
Hello. Hello. Aloha. So as Jason said, I'm Eric Smith. I'm with LARES Consulting, and it's a small boutique firm out of Denver that I started several years ago with a good friend of mine, a business partner, Chris Nickerson. And prior to that, I've done a variety of consulting positions throughout the years, some big companies, some smaller companies. Aside from all that, I also was part of the penetration test and execution standards team that started about 4 years ago. It was a group of us that started, and now it's grown to a couple hundred people that have gotten together and put together a standard for how pen testing should be conducted, similar to what OWASP is for application testing. P-test is kind of a standard for how penetration tests should be conducted from pre-sales all the way to reports and deliverables. On top of that, I also run one of the B-Sides conferences out of Atlanta, where I'm based. So if you guys are ever in the area, we do an annual conference there as well. But really about me, I've been known to offend some people throughout time. I also like to void warranties and steal things. And if you're a friend of mine, you probably know that I'm pretty persistent in how I operate in life and with work. So that's a little more truth about me. So how many people have actually seen a talk about social engineering? Probably everybody, right? So I promise this talk won't be anything like those. I'm not going to be releasing any kind of tools. I'm not going to show you how to use automation and frameworks and how to clone a site and how to send a fish, because everyone's probably done that at least once, right? But before we can actually get to the important part of this talk and what I wanted to tell you guys about, we kind of have to start from the beginning, right? So let's take a little stroll to memory lane, talk about some of the things you guys have probably already heard. So everyone knows that, dumpster diving is bad, right? You can steal things about companies and about organizations just by things they throw away, whether it's partners, organizations they deal with, data that they don't think is sensitive that they throw away and you could steal and use against them. So you've heard about dumpster diving. You've heard about things like shoulder surfing. It's bad. Don't let anybody look over your shoulder because they steal your passwords. You've heard things about phishing. Phishing is bad. You shouldn't click links. I don't know what exactly that guy was doing, but he did it wrong apparently. And the other guy, I have no idea what he's phishing for, but everyone's heard about phishing, right? And then if you've actually looked into browser security and settings for browsers, IE had this crazy thing years ago where you can actually tell Internet Explorer to send data anytime you click a button, which was really cool for phishers. You've also heard that support staff are always great targets, right? Target the help desk. They like to reset passwords for you. They like to give out data. A lot of times you can call up and just say a name and they'll give you a password. Those are always great targets for phishing and social engineering. Human resources, they're always a great target for attackers. They like to give out data, but they also like to open attachments. So if we're trying to break into a company, we like to send things to human resources because they'll typically open Word documents that are embedded with bugs and macros and backdoors, or spreadsheets that might have macros in them, or whatever it might be. HR is just great targets. We've heard about smoking areas. We know smoking areas not only are bad for a company, but they're also bad for your health. We've heard about transit systems. We know that riding to work every day on a bus or in a taxi or at some kind of mass transit system, someone could clone your badge, someone could steal your badge, someone could listen to a conference call that you're on and gain data, gain information about your company. We know social functions are bad because people like to drink, people like to get intoxicated and tend to talk much more openly and loud about things that could be sensitive. We know about client-side attacks. We know road apples are always bad things. Don't pick up CDs or thumb drives and put them in your computer at work because all of a sudden you have a backdoor on your computer, right? We know about client-side surveillance. We know that dropping cameras in place at organizations, someone can record what you're doing, someone can see the PIN code for your alarm pad, they can monitor your activity. These things are bad too, right? So you guys have heard about all those things and all these other talks about social engineering, right? Cool, everyone's now a social engineer, so we can get past that. Now we can actually talk about what this talk's about. So, little question. Who makes the best social engineers? Correct. I think it's children. I have a 4-year-old at home. She's amazing at social engineering. She pulls things off on me all the time that I have no idea where it comes from. I get owned by her all the time, and she's 4. So I don't know what's going to happen when she's 14. We'll see. But from the time you're born, these things are ingrained in you, right? You know how to get past things. You know how to bait people. You know how to do switching. You know how to do, these little intricate, tricks to get someone to do what you want them to do, right? Manipulate them. Kids are great at it. So from the time you were born, you know how to be a social engineer. So then you grew up. You got a job. You went to work. Maybe you got a little smarter. Maybe you started learning how to, show things at work, right? Automation comes into play. People create, cool things like, frameworks to do automation for you, whether it's, Autopwn or whether it's, social engineering frameworks. All those types of things are really cool because someone else created them, and now you get a chance to run them through some kind of little menu-driven system, and now you too can be a badass, right? In reality, what these things have done have just made you lazy. They made the entire industry lazy because there's a tool that replaces what you would like to do. So no longer do you have to go and do all the legwork of cloning a site, gathering email addresses, gathering your targets, doing OSINT, sending your attack to someone. All these things are built into some kind of framework for you. Frameworks are great, but in reality, they make people lazy, right? Agree? Cool. So you decided that these frameworks are awesome. I'm going to go use this framework. I'm going to take it into the workplace. I'm going to show my boss that I'm, one bad dude because I can clone Gmail. I can show you how a password could be nabbed or tab nabbing or click jacking or whatever, the latest attack is for whatever framework you might be using. So you take these things to work and you show your boss, and you probably use Gmail as a demo because everyone likes to use Gmail just like everyone likes to use Odo 67 for their pen test demo, right? So you take these things to work, and all of a sudden you're a rock star, right? But your boss is looking at you going, I've seen these things happen 100 times. I have no idea what the value is in this. I'm confused, right? So now your boss is there, and you've explained to them that phishing is really bad because I just showed you that I could clone Gmail, I could steal your passwords. But in reality, they're confused. They have no idea what the value is behind this kind of testing. So all of a sudden, all these things are out of alignment. You have no idea how to even go about showing value to your boss or your organization or maybe your client if you're a consultant because they're confused. They see all these demos, all these frameworks, all this automation, and they think, how am I going to, even protect myself against these kinds of attacks? Because they're going to happen. Users are going to click stuff. Users like to hear the little button go click, 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 and all of a sudden there's shells on their systems. So the organizations look at it and go, well, if this is going to happen, how do I fix it? How do I protect myself against it? And everything's confused, right? They have no idea where the value is behind this kind of testing. But in reality, these things are happening out there in the real world, right? I mean, these are statistics from Q1, and I can't read the number up there, but it's like 40-some thousand phishing sites were detected. And the sad part is the highest number of phishing sites that were detected are here in the U.S. Not China, not Russia, not all these little third world countries that you hear about that are attacking us, the U.S. Every time you see these phishing reports and statistics come out, it's always the U.S. as being the hotbed for all these types of sites and all these activities. So it's happening right here in the field. It's happening right here in our own backyard, but companies don't know how to address that. They're confused because all these different things that are happening, you guys are going in and showing them, hey, these things are real attacks. Here's an automation framework that shows you how to clone a site and grab a password. How do we protect against these things? They're asking all these questions, and they have no answers. So what's the right way to fix this? Well, in reality, what you should be talking to your business about, or if you're a consultant, your clients, is the only way to actually address these issues is go through proper testing. Not the vanilla testing of, here's me cloning an OWA site or a webmail site or our intranet portal and stealing someone's passwords, but get past those things. Show them that even though these attacks are occurring every day, how does it affect your bottom line? Which is how you earn revenue for your company, right? If you guys make widgets, if you sell something, how does a phish impact the bottom line of an organization? So the problem that we see a lot of times is companies are going through the wrong kind of testing. And you guys have probably seen that with anything that you've talked about or dealt with in this industry. If you have the wrong kind of testing, the wrong answers come out of that testing. And all of a sudden the organization has no idea what the value is behind that kind of testing. So the problem that we see a lot of times is it isn't so much that the companies are confused, is they're receiving the wrong kind of service. And if they're not getting the right kind of service, they don't have the right answers, they don't know how to fix these problems. So let's talk about what some of those tests are and how things are occurring today in the industry and what's broken with it, right? So here's how traditional phishing occurs, which is pretty obvious and pretty blatant, right? And that's the way we kind of see this industry, is it's these cookie-cutter type of attacks, it's these canned exploits, it's these canned, framework type of attacks, and the companies are receiving this kind of service. But there's really no answers coming out of it. They don't see the value in it. There's no impact in testing. There's no, value derived from the kind of testing that they're getting. This one's actually a real one that I took about a month ago. My wife and I were driving around and saw that in a parking lot. Totally legit looking, right? Pretty scary. It's actually a real service from what I understand. So the problem with traditional phishing, right, is consultants, internal organizations that are having their own red teams test them, whatever it might be, they're diagnosing themselves with their own problems, right? So if they go and contract someone to actually do this kind of a testing, they're giving them the answers before they start. They're giving them a list of email addresses. They tell them to attack between 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock. It has to be shut down by 5. And all they care about is how many users click the link. And so the tester gets this information ahead of time. They build their little fish with some kind of automated framework. They send out this fish. They hope it works. They hope it gets past their perimeter filters, whatever it might be. They track their metrics. They generate some kind of automated report, and they send them an invoice, and that's it. So it's the same vanilla test that we see over and over, that companies don't understand what the value is and how do they fix these things. It's this automated type of test and report mentality versus showing them what the impact is if a real attack does occur. So let's talk about how to get past the vanilla test and actually step it up and show you what the big boys do, right? What the big companies that are actually going through this kind of testing, whether it's monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever it might be, what are they receiving? How do they get value out of this kind of testing? So the right way to do it is something like this, which, in all honesty, that place has so many baits and traps and trap doors and canaries and everything you can think of for, social engineering types of attacks, because he was a master at it. That's a good one, huh? So how it should really be done is testing these different components when you're evaluating someone from a social engineering threat perspective. When we do a phishing attack, we look at it from multiple perspectives. Perimeter defense. Once I get in kind of exfil data, what kind of inline detection do you have? What kind of reporting mechanisms do you have from an incident response capability? All these types of things should be involved when you do some kind of social engineering engagement. If I'm going to send a phish to a customer, I don't necessarily care about how many people clicked it. I care about what kind of impact it causes the business if someone does click it. Because in all reality, if you build your organization the right way and one machine is compromised, it shouldn't mean the end of your company. The keys to the kingdom shouldn't result from one compromised host. And that's the problem that we see in a lot of businesses that we assess, is the internal defenses are so weak that one compromised host means keys to the kingdom. Typically, it takes us, a matter of minutes once we've compromised one machine to gain privileged access in the organization and affect their bottom line. And that's not the right way to build a company. And it's the same analogy that people used for years, where a company is hard and protected on the outside, but soft and chewy on the inside. And the same goes for when we're doing phishing. A lot of times, once we've gotten past the perimeter defense, we're inside, all these other areas fall pretty quickly because the right controls, whether it's technical or process or monitoring or whatever it might be, those things aren't in place, and we're able to evaluate those other areas pretty quickly. So when we send a phish, there's a lot of things that we want to look at, but most importantly, one of the major components that I look at is how easily can I exfiltrate data out of the business? Is DLP working properly? Are there perimeter controls in place to see that large file transfers are occurring over some kind of encrypted SSL connection? Or is there technology in place that detects lateral movement from, say, a workstation subnet to a server subnet? All these things come into play when you do phishing properly, because in the end of the day, if someone's doing a phish for you, once they get inside, and chances are they probably are after you've gone through this a couple times, maybe you get stopped. But for the first couple times someone goes through a real phishing attack and they do get inside, it's pretty easy to move around and affect something that's critical to the business, right? So how well are you monitoring that kind of movement inside the organization? And that's really the value that comes out of this kind of testing, is once I get inside, how fast can you detect and stop me? And that's really what the point of this kind of service is. It's not how many users can I trick into clicking a link. It's once someone clicks a link, how quickly can you detect if someone's inside and moving around? Does that make sense? So let's talk about how we do it, some of the techniques we use, and some of the companies that we've gone after for several years now, they become much harder because they've gone through rigorous testing every quarter or every year. So what kind of techniques do we employ to get around some of those high-level controls that they've put in place now? So first, before you do anything, right, you have to prepare for your attack. And this is kind of just a funny slide, but it makes sense when you think of it from an attack perspective, because if someone's going to attack your organization, there's a lot of things they're going to do prepare ahead of time. And from a consulting perspective, when we're ready to attack, there's different ways to prepare. If you're going to plan to attack at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, then you're damn well going to do your homework Sunday night to make sure all your stuff is ready to go. Your payloads, your phishing sites, your failovers, all these different things are being tested properly, right? But at the same time, you're going to prepare yourself to be ready to go at 8 a.m. in the morning when you fire on Monday morning, right? So in reality, preparation really starts with intelligence gathering. Every time you see a test on pen testing, or you see a talk on pen testing, or any kind of assessment services, intelligence gathering is always the first step. And until you've actually done proper intelligence gathering, your attacks aren't going to have any kind of value. You're going to blow your wad because you've done minimal intelligence gathering. You've collected 10 addresses, or 10% about the environment, or whatever it might be, because you shortcutted your OSINT phase. And that's just going to result in poor value for your client because you haven't done proper homework. So before you even do any kind of active testing, you should go through some kind of passive analysis of the organization to footprint them, understand what they do, understand how they operate, understand their tone, their language, what's going on currently within the organization. All those kinds of things become valuable when you're designing some kind of social engineering attack. So once you've done all that, you're ready to go ahead and set up your phishing site, right? Well, when you create your phishing site, it's important to understand all those things that are currently happening within the business, because it may not be as easy as going out and buying a domain name that might be similar to their company, but maybe they've just acquired a third-party business, or maybe they have a new marketing campaign that's occurring. Whatever those things might be, they're current for that business that employees have seen, chatter about internally with emails going back and forth. Whatever it might be, it's something relative to them currently at the time. So be very, intelligent about how you select your domain name. But don't take the shortcut road that we see a lot of people do, where they just try to obfuscate it with some kind of, tiny URL or bit.ly or whatever it might be, because chances are those things aren't going to work. You're going to go out and spend all this time designing all these cool little features and gadgets of this phish you're going to do, and then you're going to obfuscate it with some free service and hope that someone clicks it. It's a bad idea. It makes sense to spend the $9.99, go register your site, buy a legit domain name, do all your homework ahead of time, set those things up so it looks legitimate, right? But then on top of that, make sure that when you go buy your domain name, you register your MX record, you register your mailer. So don't try and use a third-party service to send a phish through. Register your MX record of your mail server. Make sure it's legitimate so that if someone does a reverse lookup on where the mail is coming from, it actually passes those control checks that they're going to do. So chances are, if you do all those things ahead of time, you've purchased a legit name, you've registered it, you've registered your MX record, you've tested your mailer, you've done all these different things. When the email actually gets sent to the target, it's going to clear some of those initial checks that they do. But on top of that, once you've done all your OSINT and you've collected all these different addresses, validate those targets. We see a lot of companies fail in this phase of the attack because they don't validate those addresses. And the way that we do it is we'll take the 500, 600 addresses we've collected and validate those first. Most companies out there, their mail server will validate a valid address versus a bad address. And this is helpful because if I'm sending an attack at a business and there's 500 addresses that I have that I've collected, and 200 of those are invalid, no longer employees for the company, and they start failing as bad recipient, if someone's got some kind of alerting set up on their mail server and they see all these bad addresses coming through during some kind of mass campaign, they're going to know right away this is a phishing attack. Someone's collected old stale data online. They've now sent those as targets for their attack, and all of a sudden these things are not getting delivered because they're not valid addresses. So go through and validate those targets, make sure they're valid addresses before you even send them. But also it's helpful to actually do intelligence of the people you've gathered, because the last thing I want to do is send my attack to a bunch of people that are on the IT staff or the incident response staff or the legal staff, even though legals are going to target. All these different things are going to get you caught more than likely. So go through and filter some of those addresses out to make sure that I'm not going to send my phishing attack in the very beginning of my attack phase to the IT staff. I want to target someone that's going to be less privy to what the security policies are, or maybe they're not as technical and they're going to click the link quicker than someone that might be a domain admin for the company. So screen some of those things out. But then last, one of the most important pieces is test your payloads. Test it on multiple operating systems, test it on multiple types of browsers, whatever you're going to target for that particular campaign, make sure you test it before you send it out. You don't want to be testing it later in the field once your attack is already in the wild. Another important piece of it is make sure that you clean it. How many people actually have proxies in your organization? Do some kind of web filtering, some kind of screening, inbound, outbound checks, whatever it might be, whether it's a Blue Coat, a WebSense, a Cisco device, whatever it might be. This is probably my favorite piece. So when I go buy a domain name and I'm going to target a company, say I'm going to target Google. I'm going to go buy a domain name that might be similar to Google. Then my next step is going to be I'm going to set up a CNAME for that company. So I've now bought, say, LARES, company I own. Say I buy a company or a domain name that's, LORES. So I set up a CNAME and I point LORES to LARES. And then I go and register that website with all these different proxy filtering services, whether it's Blue Coat, WebSense, McAfee, whatever they might have. And I've learned all these things during my intelligence gathering to find out what kind of proxy they have internally. And those are pretty easy to find. You'd be surprised how many different tech forums are out there where you can actually go and collect data about a company and say, okay, so-and-so company has a Blue Coat, this particular company has a WebSense. Now I know that I need to go clean my site in this particular, proxy cleaner before I even send the target. So take your website, set up the CNAME, submit it to Blue Coat, file it as, an e-commerce site or whatever that particular company is that you're targeting. So you file the category that it's for. You submit it, they then go and do a scrape on that service pretty quickly. You'd be surprised. I've seen Blue Coat within a matter of 5 minutes inspect the site and approve it as a new e-commerce site for this particular company. So the beauty behind that is if I buy a domain, I CNAME it to the legitimate site, I submit it to Blue Coat hits it, it goes to the legitimate site. I've never had to set up a website whatsoever. All I did was a CNAME. Now my new phishing domain is cleaned through Blue Coat, WebSense, whatever it might be. Now I know it's going to get past those controls when I send it. Make sense? And that's just a short summary. There's obviously, 20 different kinds of proxies out there. We've got a laundry list of the URLs to actually submit those, but those are probably the most common ones. So if you guys had a chance to take those down, those are good ones to submit your sites to before you attack. Architecture, we talked about this a little bit before. Important piece here is having failover. I can't tell you how many times that we've been involved during an attack and a system becomes unstable, it receives too many shells, Metasploit craps itself, whatever it might be. You need failover. Have secondaries ready. Have new IPs ready. Be able to roll to a new IP if they block your IP. Have all those things tested and ready to go in case something does happen during your attack phase where you need to roll quickly because you don't want to lose your access. The window of exposure is pretty short, and the window of attack is pretty short when you're doing phishing against a big organization. A lot of times they'll identify the campaign pretty quickly if it's a mass campaign. Spear phishing is a bit longer to detect sometimes, but the chances are that once they do detect those mass phish campaigns, they're going to start blocking IPs. So make sure your architecture is set up properly so that you guys have the ability to roll to new sites, new servers, new listeners, whatever it might be. And then, of course, everyone wants to see metrics, right? Everyone wants to know, out of 500 users, how many people click the link. So one of the easiest ways to do that is just have a session ID variable on your phish URL that you use. And here, the example that I'm using here that we did for a long time is just a base64 encoded version of the email address. So, for example, esmith@lares.com would be that base64 encoded string. So every time I send my phish out, every target gets a unique session ID within the phish URL. Because the primary part of the phish URL is a cleaned domain within your proxy, it's still going to allow those things through. But it makes it very easy for me later as a consultant to generate those reports and say, here's every URL that had a 200 in the Apache logs, and then I can go back and decode all those, base64, decode them, and say, here's all the valid addresses that actually click the link. So it's really easy for me to say, out of the 500 users that I targeted, here's the 150 that clicked the link, and here's the actual email addresses for those ones that clicked the link. So pretty easy, poor man's way of tracking phishing attacks. So metrics are awesome, but it's really about going after the bottom line, right? What makes the company tick? How do they operate? How do they make money? How do you affect their bottom line when you attack them? And that's really what this type of service is supposed to be about. And that's the problem with this industry that we see a lot of times is they're all about capturing the metrics and getting the report out as fast as they can and sending an invoice. They're not necessarily showing how do you affect the bottom line of that company. So let's talk about some of these expert techniques, or what I like to call masturbating. And we'll go through a couple of scenarios of what we like to do for phishing techniques. Actually had a different slide in there, but we had to sanitize it for a couple of conferences, so that's my new one. So the first technique that we like to use is called live bait phishing or netting. And this one's great because I like to target webmail portals. How many companies out there that you guys work for have OWA or other types of webmail exposed to the internet with single factor? You can say it if you want to. I know you have them. I've seen them already. So OWA is great. I love OWA. It's an awesome place to target. 9 times out of 10 companies don't monitor failed logins very much, especially on OWA, so we like to target those webmail portals. If I get a chance to get into OWA, there's a lot of cool tricks that I can use inside OWA, and we'll talk about a few of those, but that's just one example. I like to use it because it's the most common. Everyone knows what OWA is, right? Outlook Web Access. Cool. So if I see OWA, I target that, I brood it, I get a valid login, and now I can dump all the users. So previously, in old versions of OWA, 2003 and sometimes 2007, you actually had the ability to download the address list. But in 2010, they changed that. So there's another cool way that you can do it, and if you guys are familiar with Burp or any kind of proxy, you can trap the request once you've authenticated into OWA. Now that you've authenticated, after you go through about formal requests to actually look someone up, where you can say find someone, you can look someone up in the actual address list within OWA. If you trap that request, there's a record return variable that's in there, and you see highlighted there called SR. You can trap that request and brood that. And by brooding that, you then get a SIP value in every one of your requests with 50 to 100, 250, however many times you increment that request. And you can dump all the email addresses out of that. Once I've got all your email addresses, now I have new email addresses to send to, but I also have usernames to target during additional brute forcing. So OWA is a great place to get an initial hook, dump data, and then gather more information about the company. You can also do other cool tricks with OWA, like find out what kind of corporate campaign they have, or what's going on internally at that time. You can see people's calendars. You can bug their calendars with backdoors and macros and attachments. There's a lot of cool things you can do inside OWA. But the cool part about this particular technique is I can gain more data about your company, more email addresses, more target information, more phone numbers that I can pretext against, whatever it might be. I can gain that information just by having one valid account with OWA. So once I have OWA access, and you probably have a single-factor VPN, now I can log into VPN. The beauty of VPN typically is you've spent all this money. It's an awesome picture, isn't it? So you've spent all this money protecting the front door. You've got two-factor authentication, maybe. You've got some kind of IPS or IDS. You've got strong authentication, complex passwords, all these different things you've put in place on your perimeter. But in reality, and you may have NAC too, but in reality, once I've connected with VPN, I've gotten around all those controls that you spent all this money on. Because typically VPN drops you in right on the internal subnet. So all these technology and controls and processes and monitoring, all these things you spent buku amounts of money on, I've gotten past all those with one valid account externally. I don't have to visit your site. I don't have to come internal. I don't have to plug into your network and try to do MAC filtering and IDS and IPS and NAC bypass and certificate authentication and all these different things because I've gotten on your VPN. So I've bypassed all those controls. So that's the beauty of getting access externally, especially when you gain access to someone's VPN. So the next technique that I like the most is called fish in the middle. We kind of created that one internally, but it makes sense when you understand what we're talking about here. So I've gained access to OWA. I then find a conversation between Sally and Jim, and they're sending a spreadsheet back and forth. Gain access to that conversation. Take the spreadsheet, download it, bug it, put a macro in it, take the PDF, backdoor it, whatever it might be, and engage directly into that conversation. So now I've inserted myself between their active conversation they may have had minutes ago. I've bugged this attachment that someone's familiar with. It's credible. They've opened it previously, and I resend it to them. They open it. They have no idea that Jim's account was just compromised, and he just resent the same attachment minutes ago, and all of a sudden his machine is compromised. So we tried this on a client, and we sent it, they received it, and then we get this email back that says, or we see an email land in their inbox saying, something's not working. So we look into it and we're like, all right, what's going on here? So we find out, after replying back to this response and deleting the emails as we're doing it because we're inside this compromised account, that we find out that they're running 64-bit. Like, shit, we didn't test it properly. So what do? We go into developer mode right there in the middle of an attack. So not only do we have a valid attack, Phish on the line, she's engaged, she's opening attachments, we've bugged it, we've backdoored it, but now all of a sudden we have a problem. So one of my coworkers, Chris Gates, as well as Dave Kennedy, you probably guys know him, we worked together for a matter of minutes. We figured out that there was an issue with 64-bit and shellcode with macros. Dave whipped up a quick little script called Unicorn. We were able to chunk the data, and we then made a new backdoor, resent it back to this chick again. She then opens it, and she says, okay, it opened, but now I'm receiving this little macro warning. Like, sweet, it worked. Sure, go ahead, no problem, click it. So we're doing all this with a compromised account, and obviously these emails are landing in someone's inbox if they're sitting in front of their computer. So not only are we having to respond quickly, but we're having to delete emails so they can't see what we're doing. So we figure it out, she opens it, we get shell, works. So that's actually out. You guys can find Unicorn on Gates' blog, Carnal Onage, as well as Dave has it on his Trusted Sec blog as well. So another cool technique that we like to use is called side channels. And side channels are great because chances are if an attacker is manipulating you into clicking some kind of link, they've got active communication with you, they've engaged in some kind of conversation, chances are they're not going to go from email to some other means of communication. They're not going to call you on the phone. They're not going to text you. So if someone's going to do that, chances are you're going to believe it. You're going to think it's the help desk. You're going to think it's someone that you work with. Because China's not going to go from an email to a phone call. That just doesn't happen, right? So we like to use those side channels to build more credibility, but also lure them into doing more things. Maybe they're getting tired of responding back and forth to emails. Maybe they're catching on to what we're doing, and they decide they're not going to click any more links. But you get them on the phone, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get them to do more things because now you've engaged with them actively on the phone. You can walk them through some kind of attack, and you can lure them into doing more things. But you can also do some of those things we talked about previously, like evaluating why something might not be working. So it makes sense sometimes to go further in your attack, but the value behind this as well is companies spend a lot of time educating users on phishing. They don't talk a lot about pretexting. They don't talk a lot about how to protect if someone calls you on the phone, or how to protect if someone sends you a malicious text. So keep those things in mind when you're educating your users internally, but also when you or coworkers might be getting attacked, or if you're a consultant and you're attacking, use these techniques to gain further access, lure them into revealing more information, whatever it might be. The last technique I like to call chum and clean, and this is my favorite. So a lot of times you want to create some kind of diversion. So we'll send a mass phish campaign knowing that it's going to get detected, knowing that they're going to send some kind of response, they're going to alert, and they're going to say, all of a sudden this attack came in at 9 a.m. this morning. It was a URL that looked like OWA. They asked you to click it, log in, reveal your password. If you receive this email, then let the help desk know immediately. So you do these things intentionally to generate some kind of activity or chatter inside the company. So that's the chum part. So you wait for the response. This is an example of one response we had from a client, and it was a legitimate response from their support staff or IR team or whatever it might be, saying this email came in previously and it was, an attack, and we've, since then responded, and we've done all these types of things. You wait for that response. Once that response comes in, you bring in the cleaner. So with the cleaner, what you do is you use their response to attack them further. And a lot of times this pisses clients off, so be careful. Because we've had phone calls where clients call and go, okay, we know you sent this phish earlier today, but was the second one you also? I'm like, yeah. Well, when are you going to stop? I'm like, well, you paid for a full day of an attack, so we're giving you a full day of an attack. So you tend to ruffle some feathers sometime that way, but keep those things in mind because you don't want to piss your client off because they have to pay the invoice. Or if you're doing it internally, you don't want to piss your boss off. But you use that first piece of attack to build your second tier, right? Now you've built this second attack, and the good part about this from an attack perspective is the user is already on edge. They know they received this email, whether they clicked it or not, whether they inserted their data, whether they did what the email told them to do. Now they're on edge and they feel bad, and they want to do something to remedy the situation. This is where the cleaner comes in. You say, you were a suspect, you were a target, you did this, this, and this. You need to do this now to fix your stuff. And you send them another link, or you send them an executable, or you send them a spreadsheet or a PDF or whatever it might be. They're going to jump on it because they want to help. But the problem is they're doing it for a malicious actor. So those things come in nice when you want to go further and you want to generate some kind of noise, because chances are, as you start doing these things for clients over time, they're going to get very good at detecting mass phish campaigns, but they're going to fail at doing targeted phishing. So these are great ways to show them that they can still be victim to a mass phishing campaign that might be 2 or 3 layers deep, not just send one, hope someone clicks it. That make sense? So let's talk about dealing with incident response, because that's always the next phase once you've done this type of attack. You've sent your phish, someone's clicked a link, someone's engaged, and now incident response is involved. The way we like to play with incident response to see if those things are actually working properly, because remember back to the pyramid I showed you, this is one component of what a proper phishing attack should be. How is IR engaged? How are they, how are they identifying? How are they monitoring? How are they responding to their user base? So one of the things that we like to do is, before we even send out any kind of attack, we have a list of what addresses can't talk to our phishing site. And they might be SunGuard, SecureWorks, all these third-party MSSs that you guys probably outsource to, and they do your monitoring for you. If we know their IP space, they can't inspect our site. So let's block them. Let's not allow them to even access our site. So then they might have to come from a Comcast IP space or a Roadrunner or a Time Warner. Block all that too. And if you really want to get granular with it, whitelist only the IP space for the client. Now, no one else can inspect your site, no one else can pull down your payloads, and someone's going to have to forward it to them or do some kind of offline analysis. It gives you more time for your window of attack. So whitelist all that stuff or blacklist it, however you want to do it. One of the other cool things that we like to do that really pisses the client off, so you have to be careful with this, is when they come from an investigation IP, whether it's SecureWorks or other MSSs or Comcast space or whatever it might be, if that IP space hits your website, redirect them back to their corporate site. Do a mod rewrite, send them back to their corporate site, and now all of a sudden they think their corporate site got infected and someone's attacking them from their own www. Now they're off on a wild goose chase inspecting something that doesn't exist. Gives you more time for your attack. So there's a lot of ways you can play the game with the cat and mouse if they're trying to do investigation and buy you more time. And in reality, that's what you're doing here. You're buying yourself more time so you have more exposure of allowing you to gain access to what's important and what makes that business tick. Because at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to show. How do you affect their bottom line? But you're getting real cool in your attack techniques, right? Be careful. This has bit us in the butt a few times. ISP abuse alerts. Client doesn't know that you're attacking them. Maybe it's a full black box, zero knowledge test, and they decide that this particular IP is malicious, and they report it. What does the ISP do? They shut it down. Or if you do, like I admit that I did years ago, you do it from your home lab, your internet at home gets shut down. Now you got to roll over to a tethering connection to get back in screened OS into your cloud boxes, whatever it might be. So keep those things in mind, that they might get your internet turned off. They might get your website dropped. Your cloud provider might drop your node for a minute. Those things could happen. So that goes back to the architecture piece. There's a chance that stuff might get shut down because you don't necessarily own that box or that connection. And if that happens, be prepared to roll over to something else. But also be prepared that authorities might show up at your house. Not admitting that happened, but it could happen. So keep those things in mind when you're going to be the attacker, that authorities could get called. If there's something in your rules of engagement with your client that says you're going to maintain active communication with them, make sure you follow the ROE. Let them know that you're attacking from this particular space. It's being investigated. You've seen these IPs connect to it. Keep those comms open. If it's full black box, stay quiet and do as much as you can. Know that it might get turned off or someone might investigate you. A lot of times you might get, or sometimes, hopefully not a lot of times, you might have to be involved in some kind of legal counsel for a corporation. And this one's good because we buy a lot of domains. We register a lot of domains. We get them cleaned in proxies and things like that before we even attack. But there are laws out there that say that you can't go buy a particular domain name. This one, for example, was FedEx Delivery or something like that. We got contacted shortly after that it's illegal, apparently, to buy a domain name that has FedEx in the domain. So legal counsel contacted us and asked us to kindly give the domain back. Can't tell you whether we gave it back or not. So those things could happen. Legal counsel could contact you. But this one was my favorite. This one is legal counsel for edible arrangements. Everyone know what edible arrangements is? It's been around for a while now. So I'm constantly getting emails from Edible Arrangements and 1-800-Flowers and sites like this around holidays and things like that, that they're running some kind of promotion for July 4th, bouquet of flowers or whatever it might be. So I decided that Edible Arrangements might be a great domain to purchase to use to target organizations around the holidays, around corporate functions they might have, whatever it might be. So I decided to purchase Edible Arrangements with M-I-N-T-S instead of M-E-N-T-S. Well, they didn't like the fact that I bought the domain, but what really pissed them off was when I bought the domain, I set up the CNAME and pointed it to 1-800-Flowers. So when they started doing an investigation, they thought 1-800-Flowers had bought the domain and was trying to steal their business. And I worked for 1-800-Flowers. So it turned into a huge mess. Lawyers and everyone else had to get involved, and it was a pain in the ass. So keep those things in mind when you're buying domains that legal counsel might get involved. So obviously, being an attacker, you're going to get better as time goes along, and you're going to get damn good at doing these attacks. There's going to be times when ethics are going to come into play. And you might get into a situation like this, where a couple of years ago, New York, and they probably still have the same issue now, they just don't talk about it much, New York had a bad problem with bed bugs. There were bed bug infestations all over Manhattan, all over, proper New York City. So there were notifications that were going out constantly about different areas that had bed bugs infestations. So we decided that because it was a particular client in New York, we would send our own notification about bed bugs. And we made up the entire email. We bought, NYC Notify or whatever the domain was, and we specifically listed areas around the company's office address, that all these places were infested with bed bugs. So the attack worked. We got shells. We got in. But the bad part was they decided someone internally forwarded that email to CDC. Well, because whoever worked at CDC wasn't very technical, they decided to click the link also. So it goes back to ethics. Be very careful. Sometimes you receive out-of-band shells that may not be under the contract you have with your particular client. So keep those things in mind, that sometimes your attacks are really good and you might get things that are out of scope. Another great one was here. We decided, I don't know if any of you have ever lived in New York City or visited, but the transit systems in New York and New Jersey are notorious for not offering any kind of refunds. You spend money, you get screwed, whatever, you lost the money. No refunds whatsoever. We decided to buy a domain that was going to offer refunds for the transit system. Went to client, all the users internally thought it was the greatest thing. Everyone signed up and registered and gave us their personal information and passwords and whatever else. But the problem was a big bank in New York City also decided to click the link because someone internally forwarded it to someone else that worked at a bank. So again, keep those things in mind. If your attacks are very good, very authentic, and you've done all your proper homework of getting these things past perimeter controls, someone's going to forward that email. It's going to go outside the boundary of that organization. And chances are someone from another company, maybe big bank, is going to click the link. Sometimes you got to kill those shells. So keep those things in mind. But what this all boils down to, right, is social engineering is one component of demonstrating impact against a business. And when we demonstrate impact, we like to use multiple avenues of attack, whether it's physical, social, electronic, or a blend of those things. So if you want to demonstrate impact the right way, you walk in, you smash them, you steal what you need to steal, and you walk out. And that's the way you do it if you want to do it proper. But what that really boils down to is red team testing, and that's what we're all about. So right here is just kind of an example of what red team testing is, what blended threat testing is. And the way that operates is, if I want to attack your company, I might do my electronic analysis first. I might gain access externally. I might get in via social engineering. I might get in via phishing. I might get in via direct exploit externally. Or maybe I got lucky enough to pop an account via OWA. I got in via VPN. But once I'm in, I don't stop there. I go after your badge system. Once I have your badge system, now I can physically make badges for your company. Or maybe I can remotely open doors. And then I can physically visit your company. I can walk in and plug in internally, or I can physically steal stuff. And all those things come into blended threat attacks where social, physical, and electronic overlap. And once you start combining those things, you'll be able to demonstrate impact much more to your company or your clients if you're a consultant. And that's it. Thank you.